In rock and roll history, there's a difference between a comeback and a resurrection. I'm Big Rick, and today on Rock Talk Studio, I'm ranking the top 5 greatest returns to the stage from bands who survived the unthinkable, losing a key member. I was really inspired by the news of Rush returning to the stage with drummer Anika Nilles, so I want to take a look at the bands who managed to turn tragedy into a second life. I'm also going to go a little bit deeper than just a list. For every band I rank, I'm connecting them to a specific book. So if you want the full story behind the tragedy and the return, I'm giving you the definitive reference point for each one. All right, let's plug in and debate the top 5 greatest resurrections in rock history. Okay, let's go. I'm going to start with number 5, Metallica. I know Metallica fans are going to kill me with this ranking, but I'm starting here with this one. This is the only band where the other band members were actually there and involved with the death of the band member. And that was September 27th, 1986, when Metallica's bus crashed in Sweden and killed bass player Cliff Burton. Burton was only 24 at the time. The rest of the band members were only 22. And Burton was the oldest member in the band and really helped guide their early sound. After his death, Metallica had a really hard time. They had to learn to write and structure complex music without their primary music mentor, really. Cliff Burton was a big influence to this band, and the lingering trauma from the immense pressure of replacing him, it really created this tense, fractured environment within the band for a long time. And what was interesting was Metallica then hired the new bass player roughly like 20 days later after Burton's death. And they said they did this because they were terrified that slowing down would cause the band to completely fall apart. Another interesting part about that was they refused to officially hire someone without the approval of Cliff's family. They went to Cliff's family, and during the audition process, Cliff's family agreed on the new bass player, Jason Newsted. Newsted stepped in, and 6 months later, they returned to the stage. It was a small warm-up gig they did at the Country Club in Reseda, California. So for each band, again, I want to highlight a book that I think adds something meaningful to the conversation. And with Metallica, I probably would start with To Live Is to Die, The Life and Death of Metallica's Cliff Burton. That was written by Joel McIver. That one came out in 2009. And then the other book that I really liked was called Metallica Back to Front. It's a fully authorized visual history of the Master of Puppets album and tour. And this one actually has the band members recounting the accident, their shock and how they processed the whole thing there of what it took to get over losing Cliff and then returning to the stage. Number 4, Bon Scott. Bon Scott died in February 1980. And AC/DC, with their new lead singer, played their first show that year in July. Enter Brian Johnson. Johnson was 32 years old at the time. He was working as a part-time mechanic and running a vinyl car roofing repair business in Newcastle. When Scott died, Angus remembered that Bon said he really liked Johnson. He recounted an earlier story where he saw him in concert. So making Johnson their top choice was kind of already preset in stone. What was interesting with this one was not only did Bon Scott kind of recommend Johnson in a weird way, they announced him as a new lead singer in April and then went right into the recording studio and cut the Back to Black album. Pretty amazing that was able to happen right after the death of Bon Scott. At the first show that Brian Johnson played, he was so nervous that he accidentally sang the exact same lyrics to 2 completely different songs in a row. But the rest is history as Brian Johnson and the band continued to make music to this day. A really good book, if you want an inside story to Brian Johnson specifically, is The Lives of Brian. It's a memoir he put out in 2022. That goes into all the detail of his life and what it was like joining this incredible band. Number 3, the member who passed at the time, I would call him kind of the emotional bedrock of this band. It was June 18th, 2011. And at the age of 69 years old, the big man, Clarence Clemons of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, passed away. March 9th, 2012, they kicked off their Wrecking Ball tour. And this was the first show without Clarence. It was an intimate, highly emotional gig at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, New York. Historic concert. And it also marked the first time they played with Jake Clemens, which was Clarence's nephew, and he had to come in and do these iconic saxophone solos and somehow replace his uncle. That was a huge undertaking for not only the band, but also Jake Clemens. But they've pulled it off, and Jake's played in that band since. An amazing comeback to the stage with a family member. Kind of think back of a family member replacing someone would be Leonard Skinner when Ronnie died and his brother came back as the lead singer. That's the only one I can think off the top of my head where an actual family member replaced somebody. Bruce's memoir, Born to Run, definitely the place to go for insight on Clarence. There's some really, especially personal moments towards the end of Clarence's life that Bruce talks about in his book. Really great, really touching. I never heard those stories before, and it really just filled out the story of this great guy, Clarence Clemens, and how Bruce and the E Street Band were able to process that and move on with his nephew, Jake Clemens. Coming up next, I'll be right back with the last two bands. If you want more conversation like this, more rock and roll books and documentaries and products and stories that matter, and if you want them sent to your email directly, I can do that for you because I offer a free newsletter once a month, the last Friday of each month. Takes this podcast and expands on what I'm talking about, rock and roll history and culture. If that sounds like something you're interested in, there is a free link in the description to the show. Go ahead and click it and I'll hook you up. All right, let's get back and take a look at the final two bands who were able to resurrect their career after the loss of a member. Number two is Duane Allman. Duane was 24 when he died, and Live at Fillmore East just came out, establishing their greatness. Such a tragic death. Not a lot of mourning here, too, like some of these other bands. The Allman Brothers Band played their first concert without Duane on November 2nd, 1971, just 24 days after his death. They performed it as a 5-piece band. They didn't replace him. This book that I'm going to recommend is not only a tremendous account of Duane's death, but how the Allman Brothers were able to rebuild themselves as a band. The book is called Brothers and Sisters, the Allman Brothers Band and the Inside Story of the Album That Defined the 70s, written by Alan Paul. Alan Paul is a great writer, kind of the definitive Allman Brothers writer. He wrote the great Allman Brothers biography, One Way Out. He's also written some really cool Stevie Ray Vaughan books. But this book is tremendous about what was going on with the culture and inside the band and how, Dickie Betts kind of saved the band and rose up and became this force with the shadow of Duane hanging over the band. The band hired Chuck Leavell, and this is a smart move. They did not try to replace Duane. They went with Chuck Leavell, and Chuck is such a great keyboard player, really added to their sound, and were able to resurrect the Allman Brothers after this tragic death of Greg's brother. Number two definitely goes to Duane Allman and the Allman Brothers. Okay, I'm going to wrap this one up with a final one because it inspired this episode today, and that was the return to the stage of Rush. I'm still buzzing about it. It happened the other night, and there's a couple of reasons why this is number one, and there's a few things. Neil Peart, one of the greatest drummers of all time, his last show was at the Kia Forum, where their first show, their return show, happened the other night. So there's a lot of nostalgia. There's a lot of returning to the stage where Neil played his last show. And then, of course, how do you replace Neil Peart? And that is they hired Anika Nilles to do this irreplaceable job. How do you sit in Neil's spot and try to recapture the magic of one of the greatest drummers of all time? I mean, Robert Plant wanted nothing to do with it when John Bonham passed away. And other people mentioned today, there's some big members. I mean, how do you replace Duane Allman, of course, but who can play Neil's parts? And I think this is one of the most scrutinized returns to the stage of any band. How is Anika going to do this? How is she going to interject her own sound? And of course, how is she going to hit those iconic fills? I spent the first 2 hours of my morning the other day just watching videos from that opening night show. And I got to say, there was some teardrops in the coffee, especially when she hit that fill from Tom Sawyer. So I'm putting Rush on the top of the list as the greatest return to the stage after the death of a member. There are definitely others that could have made the list. So give me your pick. Leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on who the greatest return to the stage was. The final book I'm going to recommend here today is Geddy Lee's memoir. Geddy is very poignant about his relationship with Neil and gracefully navigates the retelling of the stories that surrounded the time of his illness and death. Such a great memoir, especially if you're a Rush fan. I'm sure you've already read it. Geddy Lee's memoir, My Effin' Life. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road this week. I'll catch you next time in the Rock Talk studio.